The sun rose over the vast, slumbering expanse of the New Mexico territory like a bruised peach, casting long, bleeding shadows across the high desert. It was the year 1878. The wind, relentless and ancient, swept through the buffalo grass, whispering secrets that the white settlers of Red Rock Crossing were too busy or too frightened to hear. It rattled the wooden signage of the dry goods store and stirred the fine red dust that coated the main street, settling into the creases of every coat and the brim of every hat. Red Rock Crossing was not a town built for softness. It was a grid of timber and ambition struck into the hard earth, consisting of a saloon that never truly closed, a church with a bell that sounded more like a warning than a call to prayer, and a courthouse made of rough-hewn pine that smelled perpetually of sawdust and judgment. On this particular morning, the air hung heavy, oppressive despite the early hour. A strip of black bunting draped across the door of the sheriff's office, limp and grayed by the dust. It had been there for 3 weeks, marking the end of Sheriff James McKenna, a man who had been the spine of this community until a bullet shattered it. Inside the stifling heat of the courthouse, Hannah McKenna stood before the bench of Judge Halford. She was dressed in the only black gown she owned, the fabric scratching against her neck, high and tight. She was 28 years old. Though the last 21 days had etched the weariness of a decade around her eyes, yet her back was straight. She refused to crumble. Not here, not in front of the vultures who had gathered under the pretense of mourning. Judge Halford adjusted his spectacles, the glass reflecting the morning light that filtered through the dirty windows. He was a man of soft hands and hard decrees, his face flushed with the perpetual heat of the territory. "Mrs. McKenna," Halford said, his voice a dry rasp. "We all mourn the passing of Sheriff James. He was a good man, a cornerstone." "He was my husband," Hannah said, her voice clear, cutting through the murmurs of the gallery behind her. "And he has been dead for 3 weeks. Judge, yet I have not seen a single report on the investigation. Just whispers of a Comanche ambush." "It was an ambush. Hannah," a voice came from the side. Hannah did not turn, but her jaw tightened. Silas Crowley sat in the front row, sprawling as if the bench and the town itself belonged to him. He wore a suit of gray wool that cost more than most families earned in 5 years, and a gold watch chain glinted across his waistcoat. His eyes were not sympathetic. They were calculating, like a butcher assessing a side of beef. "Sheriff McKenna was shot on the ridge." Crowley continued smoothly. "Arrows were found. It is an open and shut case. Tragic, but the savages are becoming bolder." Hannah gripped the wooden railing in front of her. She knew James. He was the best tracker in the county. He did not walk blindly into ambushes, and in the weeks before he died, he had been quiet, watchful, checking the locks twice, cleaning his rifle with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He had been afraid, but not of Indians. "I am not here to discuss the investigation today," Hannah said, forcing her attention back to the judge. "I am here to settle the title of the Silver Mesa Ranch." Judge Halford sighed, shuffling a stack of papers. "That is precisely the issue, Mrs. McKenna. The territorial law of 1874 is quite specific regarding property rights and inheritance." He picked up a thick document. "Under the current statutes, a woman without a living husband or a male heir of age cannot hold sole title to a property exceeding 160 acres. Silver Mesa is nearly 3,000 acres. It is a strategic resource, containing the primary water access for the Northern Valley." The room went silent. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "That is my home. James and I built it. We dug the wells. We strung the wire. And without a man to defend it, it is a liability to the safety of the territory," Halford said, reciting the words as if he had rehearsed them. "The law requires a male guardian. If you do not remarry or designate a legal male guardian within 1 month of the probate opening, the land reverts to the territory to be sold at auction for the public good." "For the public good?" Hannah laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You mean for Silas Crowley's good? Careful." "Hannah," Deputy Cole Harding spoke up. He was standing by the door, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. He was a handsome man in a shallow way, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had wanted Hannah long before she married James, and he had never quite forgiven either of them for it. "Mr. Crowley is merely a concerned citizen, and as for a guardian, you know my offer stands." "I can protect the ranch. I can protect you." Hannah looked at Harding, feeling a wave of revulsion. "I do not need your protection, Cole, and I certainly do not need a husband chosen by the state. You have 30 days. Mrs. McKenna," Judge Halford said, banging his gavel once. A dull thud. 1 month. Otherwise, the auction will proceed." "This is theft," Hannah said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Legalize theft." "It is the law," Halford snapped. Before Hannah could retort, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The sudden intake of breath from the gallery was audible. 2 federal soldiers marched in, dragging a man between them. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, the iron chains clanking heavily against the wooden floor. He was tall, lean, and moved with a grace that the heavy boots of the soldiers could not stifle. He was Comanche. He wore buckskin trousers worn smooth by riding, and a faded calico shirt that had seen better days. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, braided with strips of red cloth. His face was a mask of stoic indifference, high cheekbones sharp enough to cut, eyes dark and unreadable. "Get that savage out of here," someone shouted from the back. "Kill her," another voice screamed. Reverend Pike, sitting in the second row, stood up, clutching his Bible to his chest. "Lord, preserve us. Why is this heathen brought into the house of justice?" The soldiers shoved the prisoner forward until he stood just a few feet from Hannah. The smell of wood smoke, leather, and horse sweat washed over her, a sharp contrast to the stale bay rum and tobacco scent of the townsmen. "Order," Judge Halford shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly. "Order in this court, Sergeant. What is the meaning of this?" The lead soldier, a tired-looking man with dust in his mustache, saluted lazily. "Found him on the edge of town, Your Honor. He was asking for the sheriff. Said he had business here. We figured since you were settling McKenna's affairs, you ought to see this. He claims he knew him." "Knew him?" Deputy Harding scoffed, stepping forward, his hand tightening on his baton. "He probably scouted him for the war party that killed him. I say we hang him now and save the territory at the cost of a trial." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Silas Crowley watched intently, his eyes narrowing. The Comanche prisoner slowly lifted his head. He looked at Harding, then at Crowley, and finally, his gaze rested on Hannah. For a second, the mask slipped. There was recognition there, and something else. Sorrow. Judge Halford glared down at the prisoner. "You speak English, boy." The room quieted, waiting for the grunt or the silence that usually greeted such questions. The young warrior straightened his spine. When he spoke, his voice was a deep baritone, the words shaped with a precision that stunned the room. "I speak it," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. "State your name," Halford demanded, recovered from his momentary shock. "My people call me Noconi," he said. "The Wanderers. But James McKenna called me Noah." "You admit to knowing the sheriff?" Halford asked. "I am a friend of James McKenna," Noconi stated. He did not shout. He did not plead. He stated it as a fact as immutable as the sunrise. "I did not kill him. I am here because I made him a promise." "A promise?" Harding laughed. A harsh, barking sound. "A savage promising a lawman likely promised to scalp him? Silence. Deputy!" Halford snapped. He looked at Noconi with a mixture of curiosity and distaste. "What promise?" Noconi looked directly at Hannah. "To see that his will is done. We have the will right here." The town lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Abernathy, squeaked from his table. He held up a sealed envelope. "It was found in the sheriff's safe box. It is dated 4 weeks ago. I was about to read it when this interruption occurred." "Read it then," Crowley commanded from his seat. his voice low but carrying an authority that superseded the judge. "Let us get this farce over with so we can deal with the Indians." "Mr. Abernathy broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. He adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. "I, James Patrick McKenna, have a sound mind and body," Abernathy began, his voice wavering. He read through the standard preambles, the distribution of minor personal effects. Then he paused. He blinked, bringing the paper closer to his face. He looked up at the judge, then at Hannah, and finally at the Comanche in chains. "Go on, man," Crowley barked. "Regarding the property known as Silver Mesa Ranch," Abernathy read, his voice rising in disbelief, "including all livestock, water rights, and improvements thereon. I hereby bequeath 1/2 of the undivided interest to my beloved wife, Hannah McKenna." Hannah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "1/2 and," Abernathy continued, swallowing hard. "The remaining 1/2 of the undivided interest I bequeath to Noconi, son of the Quahati Band, also known as Noah, in recognition of debts owed and lives saved." The courtroom erupted. It was not a murmur this time. It was a roar. Men jumped to their feet. Reverend Pike began shouting scripture about the end of days. Deputy Harding drew his revolver halfway out of its holster before remembering where he was. "This is an outrage." Silas Crowley stood up, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "McKenna was mad. Leaving white land to a hostile, it is illegal. It is treason." Judge Halford was pounding his gavel so hard it looked as if the handle might snap. "Order, I will have order, or I will clear this court." Hannah stood frozen. She looked at the lawyer, then at the piece of paper that had just turned her world upside down. "Half the ranch, to a Comanche, to this Comanche." She turned slowly to look at Noconi. He stood amidst the chaos like a stone in a rushing river. He did not flinch at the shouting. He was looking at her, and suddenly, the memory clicked into place. It was 2 years ago. A harsh winter. James had ridden out to the edge of the property line, dragging a young brave who had been caught in a blizzard, half frozen. He had brought him to the barn, not the jail. Hannah had been terrified, but James had told her to bring warm broth and bread. She remembered the young man's eyes, dark, feverish, and fierce. She had handed him the bowl, her hands shaking. He had taken it with a nod. He had stayed 3 days in the hayloft while the storm raged, and then vanished with the melting snow. This was him, older, harder, but the eyes were the same. Noconi was looking at her too. He remembered the woman with hair like dried wheat and eyes the color of the rain-washed sky. The woman who had not looked at him with hate, but with fear tempered by kindness. The woman who had given him bread when he expected a bullet. "This document is invalid," Crowley was shouting, having marched up to the lawyer's table to snatch the will. "A savage cannot own property in this territory. They are not citizens." "Actually, Mr. Abernathy stammered, shrinking away from Crowley. "The law says a person is designated in a will. It does not explicitly exclude. Well, it is a gray area. Mr. Crowley, it would have to be adjudicated." Adjudicated, Crowley slammed his hand on the table. "I will not have a red-skinned neighbor. I will not have my cattle grazing next to a heathen camp." He turned his eyes on Hannah. "Mrs. McKenna, surely you see the madness in this. Your husband was clearly not in his right mind. You must contest this. If you contest it, we can overturn it, and then we can discuss the sale of the land." Hannah looked at Crowley. She saw the greed dripping from him. If she contested the will, she declared James insane. If she declared James insane, she lost her own claim to the land, and the court would order the auction immediately. "I will not contest my husband's last wishes," Hannah said. Her voice was quiet, but in the sudden lull of the room, it carried like a gunshot. "You would share your bed and board with a savage," Reverend Pike hissed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I will share the land, as James instructed," Hannah said, lifting her chin. "Impossible." Judge Halford rubbed his temples. "The law I just read to you. Mrs. McKenna, you still require a male guardian. This man cannot be your guardian. He is a ward of the state by nature of his race, or a prisoner of war. He has no legal standing to protect your interest." Crowley's eyes lit up. The gears in his mind turned, grinding out a new, more twisted plan. He smoothed his jacket and lowered his voice, adopting a tone of mock reason. "The judge is right," Crowley said. "Even if the will stands for a moment, the widow's law still applies. Hannah needs a husband, or the land is forfeit. And since this, Nokoni, owns the other half, the land is deadlocked, unless—" Crowley smiled, a reptilian baring of teeth. "Unless there was a legal union that satisfied the guardian requirement, but surely no white man would marry a woman who shares her deed with a Comanche." He looked at Harding, then back to the judge. "It seems we have an impasse that only leads to the auction block. The state cannot allow a single woman and an Indian to hold 3,000 acres. "Wait," Nokoni spoke again. He took a step forward, the chains rattling. "The paper says the land is mine. Half of it," Judge Halford sneered. "A piece of paper you cannot use, boy." "And the paper says the land is hers," Nokoni nodded toward Hannah. "Yes," the judge said. "And your law says she needs a man to keep it." "A husband," Halford corrected. Nokoni paused. He looked at Hannah. He saw the desperation she was trying to hide. He saw the wolves circling her, the man in the suit, the man with the badge. He owed James McKenna a life. James had told him, "In the dark of the moon 2 weeks ago when they met by the canyon, if anything happens to me, Noah, watch over her. They will try to take everything." Nokoni had not understood then that the watching over would require a sacrifice greater than blood. "James McKenna was my brother in spirit," Nokoni said. "He wanted this land to feed her, and to feed my people. If your law demands a marriage to keep the promise—" He stopped. The room held its breath. "I am a man," Nokoni said calmly. "I am here." Hannah gasped. "What?" Crowley laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You marry a white woman. It is illegal." "Is it, Mr.—" Abernathy piped up again, pulling a heavy book from his satchel. "Actually, the Anti-Miscegenation Act of 1876 was repealed in this territory last year due to the shortage of settlers. It is frowned upon, highly irregular, but, strictly speaking, not illegal." Silence crashed down on the courtroom again. Reverend Pike looked as if he might faint. "This is an abomination." Crowley's face went cold. He realized the trap James McKenna had inadvertently set, or perhaps intentionally set. If the Indian married the widow, the male guardian requirement was technically met. The land stayed intact. "You cannot be serious," Harding snarled, stepping into Nokoni's face. "Hannah, tell him to go to hell. Would you let this animal touch you?" Hannah looked at Nokoni. He was dirty, he was chained, and he was the most hated man in the room. But he was also the only man in the room who wasn't trying to steal from her. He was the only one who had called James brother. She looked at Crowley, who was watching her with a smug certainty that she would fold, that she would let the land go rather than disgrace herself. She thought of the ranch, the silver light on the mesa at dawn, the years of sweat and blood she and James had poured into that soil. She looked back at Nokoni. His eyes were hard, offering no comfort, only a grim alliance, a business arrangement. His eyes seemed to say, a war pact. "I need to speak with him," Hannah said. "Alone?" "Absolutely not," Harding said. "If he is to be my suitor," Hannah said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Then I have the right to speak with him. In the holding cell. 5 minutes." Judge Halford looked at Crowley. Crowley gave a nearly imperceptible shrug. Let her try. She would come to her senses. 5 minutes, Halford grunted. "Deputy, take them to the back." The holding cell was a cramped box of stone and iron bars at the back of the courthouse. Harding shoved Nokoni inside and stood by the door, hand on his gun, glaring. "Leave us, Cole," Hannah said. "I'm not leaving you with him." Harding spat. "Stand outside the door then," Hannah commanded. "If he moves to hurt me, you can shoot him. You would like that, wouldn't you?" Harding scowled but stepped out into the hallway, leaving the heavy door slightly ajar so he could hear. Hannah stood on one side of the bars. Nokoni stood on the other. Up close, he looked exhausted. There was dried blood on his temple. "Why?" Hannah whispered. "Why would you do this? They will hate you more." "They already hate me," Nokoni said. His voice was lower now, stripped of the performative strength he had shown in the courtroom. "James told me about the wolves. He said if he died, Crowley would take the water. My people need the water." Hannah. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded strange on his tongue, accented but soft. "So, this is for the water?" Hannah asked. "For the water and for the debt." Nokoni said, "James saved my life. I gave him my word I would protect what was his." "I am not a thing to be protected," Hannah said sharply. "I am not property." "I know," Nokoni said. He looked at her hands, clenched into fists at her sides. "You are the woman who gave bread to a starving enemy. You are strong, but you cannot fight them alone. Their law is a trap." "And marriage to you is not a trap?" Hannah asked. "If we do this, the town will turn on me. I will be a pariah, the squaw lover. Better a pariah with land than a beggar without it," Nokoni said simply. Hannah paced the small space. It was madness. It was social suicide. But she thought of Crowley's smug face. She thought of James, who had trusted this man enough to leave him half their life's work. James must have known. He must have known Nokoni was the only one Crowley couldn't buy. "If we do this," Hannah said, stopping to look him in the eye, "it is a business arrangement, a legal fiction. You understand. You do not touch me. You do not come into my room." Nokoni's expression did not change. "I do not want a white wife. I want the land for my people. I will sleep in the barn if I must." "The house is big enough," Hannah said. "But we live separate lives. You help me work the ranch. We stop Crowley, and when it is safe, we find a way to separate the deed legally." "Agreed," Nokoni said. "And one more thing," Nokoni added, his eyes narrowing. "No one in this town touches you. No one insults you. If they do, they answer me." Hannah felt a shiver run down her spine. It was not fear, exactly. It was the sudden realization that she was unleashing something dangerous. "Deal," she whispered. The wedding took place an hour later. It was the shortest, coldest ceremony in the history of Red Rock Crossing. Reverend Pike refused to perform it. Judge Halford had to do it himself, mumbling the words as if he were sentencing them both to the gallows. The courtroom was packed. Not a soul had left. They watched with morbid fascination as the handcuffs were removed from Nokoni's wrists. He rubbed the red chafed skin, then stood next to Hannah. He towered over her. "Do you, Hannah McKenna?" Halford choked on the words. "Take this man." "I do," Hannah said. Her voice did not waver, though her hands were ice cold. "And do you?" Halford looked at Nokoni with pure disdain. "I do," Nokoni said. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory." Halford slammed the book shut. "I pronounce you man and wife. God have mercy on your souls." There was no kiss. Nokoni did not even reach for her hand. Crowley stood up and buttoned his jacket. He walked over to them. He ignored Nokoni entirely and looked down at Hannah. "You have made a grave mistake, Hannah," Crowley said softly. "You think you have saved your ranch. You have only bought yourself a war." He turned and walked out, his boots loud on the floorboards. Harding followed, spitting on the floor near Nokoni's moccasins as he passed. Hannah stood there, the ring on her finger feeling like a shackle. She looked up at her new husband, the stranger, the warrior. "Let us go home," Nokoni said. Night fell over Silver Mesa Ranch. The wind had picked up, howling around the eaves of the sturdy log house James had built inside. The silence was louder than the wind. Hannah had locked the door to her bedroom. She stood with her back pressed against the wood, listening. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was a married woman, alone in a house with a Comanche warrior. Every story she had ever heard, every warning from the Reverend, screamed in her mind. She heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, deliberate. They paused outside her door. Hannah held her breath, her hand reaching for the latch, ready to bolster it. But the handle did not turn. The footsteps continued, fading away down the hall toward the front room. In the main room, the fire in the hearth had died down to embers. Nokoni sat on the rug before the fireplace. He did not sit on the furniture. He sat cross-legged, staring into the dying orange glow. He was alone in the enemy's house. He was married to a woman who feared him, in a town that wanted him dead. He felt the weight of the promise he had made to James pressing down on his shoulders like a mountain. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind. It was the same wind that blew through the teepees of his people, miles away. But here, it felt cold. It felt like winter was coming, though it was only June. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather pouch, his medicine bag. He held it tight. For the water, he whispered to the silence. For the land. From behind the locked door, Hannah slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was safe. For now. But as she looked at the empty side of the bed where James used to sleep, she realized that the solitude she had felt for the last 3 weeks was gone. She was no longer alone, and that was terrifying in a completely new way. The first dawn of their married life broke over Silver Mesa Ranch with a deceptive tranquility. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air smelled of sagebrush and cooling earth. Hannah McKenna emerged from her bedroom, her eyes gritty from a sleepless night, to find the main room empty. The fire had been banked perfectly, the ashes neatly swept. The blanket Nokoni had used was folded with military precision on the rug. She found him outside, standing by the corral, motionless as a statue carved from mahogany. He was watching the horses, his hands resting lightly on the top rail of the fence. He wore the same buckskin trousers and faded calico shirt, but they looked cleaner, as if he had beaten the dust out of them before sunrise. "Morning," Hannah said, her voice sounding thin in the vast silence. Nokoni turned. His expression was unreadable. "Morning. The bay mare has a stone in her left shoe. I removed it." "Thank you," Hannah said, surprised. James had meant to check that mare for 3 days. "We should walk the land," Nokoni said. "If I am to guard it, I must know its skin." They spent the morning riding the perimeter of the ranch. It was an awkward procession. Hannah rode her chestnut gelding, sitting stiffly in the saddle, while Nokoni rode the paint horse that had belonged to James. He rode without a saddle, guiding the animal with nothing but a rope halter and the pressure of his knees. Hannah showed him the boundaries, the line of cottonwoods to the east, the rocky outcrop to the north. She pointed out the main well and the creek that fed the lower pastures. Nokoni listened in silence, his eyes constantly scanning the ground, the horizon, the way the grass bent in the wind. When they reached the western boundary, where their land abutted Silas Crowley's massive holdings, Nokoni dismounted. He walked to the barbed wire fence and crouched down. He ran his hand along the ground, tracing a faint depression in the earth. "Here," he said, pointing. "The fence has been moved." Hannah frowned and dismounted. "What do you mean?" "The posts are new," Nokoni said, "but the holes are old. Look." He pointed to a series of filled-in divots about 10 feet further into Crowley's land. "The fence used to be there. Crowley has moved it forward. He has stolen 10 feet of your land along a 2-mile stretch. That is enough to divert the natural runoff from the ridge into his holding pond instead of yours." Hannah stared at the ground. She saw it now, the slight discoloration of the soil where the old posts had been dug up. "He's stealing our water before it even hits the creek." "He is a thirsty man," Nokoni said dryly. "And he thinks you are blind." They rode back in a silence that was slightly less tense than before. Hannah felt a grudging respect forming. She had looked at that fence 100 times and never noticed. He had seen it in 10 seconds. Back at the house, the cultural divide that had been ignored in the open air crashed into the confines of the 4 walls. Hannah began to set the table for a midday meal of cold beef and biscuits. She turned to see Nokoni taking a long, serrated hunting knife from his belt and placing it on the mantelpiece, right next to her mother's porcelain clock. Beside it, he laid a small leather pouch adorned with eagle feathers and beads. "No," Hannah said, perhaps too sharply. Nokoni looked at her. "No weapons in the dining room," Hannah said. trying to steady her voice. "And please remove those items. The feathers, the pouch." "These are my medicines," Nokoni said, his voice calm but firm. "They call the spirits of my ancestors to watch over this house. If I am to live here, my spirit must live here too." "It is pagan," Hannah said, using the word Reverend Pike would have used. "And it will scare visitors. If anyone sees them, you have a cross on the wall." Nokoni pointed to the simple wooden crucifix hanging over the door. "You ask your God to protect you. I ask mine. Is your God so small that he is afraid of a few feathers?" Hannah flushed. "It is not about fear. It is about propriety. We have to be careful. Nokoni, the town is watching us. If they think you are turning this house into a camp, they will come for us." "They will come anyway," Nokoni said. But he picked up the knife and the pouch. "I will keep them in my room, but do not ask me to hide who I am. Hannah, I cannot change my skin." The following day was Saturday, market day in Red Rock Crossing. They needed supplies: flour, coffee, salt. Hannah knew she could not hide forever. The wagon ride into town felt like a funeral procession. As they rolled down the main street, conversations stopped. People froze on the boardwalks, staring. Hannah sat high on the wagon seat, her chin raised, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Nokoni sat beside her, his face a mask of indifference, though his eyes missed nothing. He saw the hands resting on pistol grips. He saw the mothers pulling their children behind their skirts. "Look at that," a voice sneered from the doorway of the saloon. "The squaw lover and her pet." Hannah flinched but kept driving. "Hey, Hannah." It was Deputy Harding. He was leaning against a hitching post, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. He stepped out into the street, forcing Hannah to pull on the reins to stop the wagon. "Morning, Deputy," Hannah said coldly. "Shopping for two now." "I see." Harding grinned, looking at Nokoni with open contempt. "It must be expensive feeding a savage. They eat like wolves, don't they?" Nokoni looked straight ahead, ignoring him. "If you ever get tired of the smell—" "Hannah," Harding said, resting his hand on the side of the wagon, too close to her leg. "You know my offer stands. I can clear this rubbish out for you in an hour." "Step away from the wagon." "Cole," Hannah said. "Just being neighborly." Harding laughed and slapped the horse's flank hard, making the animal jump. They parked in front of the general store. Hannah went inside with her list, while Nokoni waited by the wagon, loading the sacks of grain she had ordered. As Hannah came out, a group of 4 men stumbled out of the saloon. They were ranch hands from the Circle T, notorious for their hard drinking. They blocked the path to the wagon. Well, the biggest one, a man with a scarred nose, slurred. "If it isn't Mrs. McKenna, heard you got yourself a new stud." Hannah tried to step around them. "Let me pass, please." "Don't be rude, darling," the man said, stepping in front of her again. "We just want to know what it's like. Does he grunt? Does he bite?" The other men laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Leave me alone," Hannah said, her heart hammering. "Maybe you need a real man to show you the difference," the scarred man said, reaching out to grab her arm. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them. "Let us pass." The voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that cut through the alcohol haze. Nokoni stood there. He had not drawn a weapon. His hands hung loose at his sides. The big man turned, sneering. "Or what? Boy, you gonna scalp me?" He swung a clumsy, heavy fist at Nokoni's head. Nokoni did not block. He simply wasn't there when the fist arrived. He stepped inside the man's guard with a fluid motion that was almost too fast to see. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it up behind his back, and kicked the back of his knee. The big man went down into the dust with a yelp of pain, his face pressed into the dirt. Nokoni held him there with one hand, calm as if he were roping a calf. The other 3 men reached for their knives. Nokoni looked up at them. His eyes were cold, devoid of anger, promising only efficient violence. "Go," he said. The men hesitated. looked at their groaning leader, and backed away. Nokoni released the man, who scrambled up, clutching his wrist, and ran after his friends. Hannah stared at Nokoni. Her chest was heaving. She had seen James fight many times brawls that were messy, bloody, and full of shouting. This had been different. It was precise, controlled. He hadn't broken the man's arm, though he easily could have. "Are you hurt?" Nokoni asked, dusting off his hands. "No," Hannah whispered. "Thank you." "Get in the wagon," Nokoni said. "We are done here." As they drove out of town, Hannah looked at his profile. "You could have killed him." "Yes," Nokoni said. "But you didn't. Dead men bring the law," Nokoni said. "Broken men just bring shame. Shame lasts longer." Hannah realized then that the stories of the bloodthirsty savage were wrong. He was not a monster. He was a warrior who understood the cost of violence better than anyone in that town. While Hannah and Nokoni navigated the hostility of the street, a different kind of hostility was brewing in the parlor of Silas Crowley's mansion. Crowley poured brandy into crystal snifters for Judge Halford and Reverend Pike. Captain Walker from the nearby fort was there too, looking uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings. "The situation is untenable," Crowley said, swirling his drink. "That Indian living in the McKenna house, it is a powder keg. My men are restless. The town is on edge. He has not broken any laws yet. Mr. Crowley," Captain Walker said stiffly. "And he is legally married to the widow." "For now," Crowley said. "But how long before he signals his tribe? How long before Silver Mesa becomes a base of operations for the Comanche raids?" "He has been peaceful," Walker argued. "He served as a scout for the army once. You know, he has a good record." "People change," Crowley said darkly, "especially when they get a taste of power. We need to be proactive. Captain, for Hannah's safety, for the safety of the territory." "What are you suggesting?" Judge Halford asked nervously. "I suggest we petition the governor to move the Comanche encampment further west," Crowley said, "away from the settlement, to the reservation where they belong." "And if they refuse?" Walker asked. Crowley smiled. "Then we will have to assume they are hostile. And if there were to be an incident, a raid on a local ranch, perhaps, then you would have no choice but to act. Would you?" Captain Walker narrowed his eyes. "I will not act on assumptions. Mr. Crowley, I need proof." "Oh, you will have proof," Crowley said softly. "In time." Back at the ranch, the atmosphere had shifted. The incident in town had broken a dam between Hannah and Nokoni. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was an alliance. Over the next few days, they worked side by side. Nokoni took over the repair of the fences. He showed Hannah how to twist the wire so it held tighter. He showed her how to read the tracks of the cattle to see where they were grazing best. One afternoon, they were tracking a stray calf near the canyon edge. "You move too loud," Nokoni said, not unkindly. Hannah stopped. "I am walking as softly as I can." "You walk like a white person," Nokoni said. "Heel first, like you are conquering the ground. You must walk a toe first, like you are asking the ground for permission." He demonstrated, moving silently through the dry brush. Hannah tried to imitate him, stumbling a little. Nokoni did not laugh. He waited. "James never taught me this," Hannah admitted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He wanted to keep me safe in the house. He said the land was his burden." "The land is not a burden to be carried," Nokoni said. "It is a blanket to be worn. If you fight it, you freeze. If you wrap yourself in it, you live." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "If you want to keep this ranch, Hannah, you must stop being a rancher's wife and start being a creature of the land. You must know it as you know your own face." "Teach me," Hannah said. And he did. He taught her which plants held water in their roots. He taught her how to listen to the birds to know if a rider was approaching miles away. But the peace was fragile. Nokoni was fighting his own war. Late one evening, as Hannah was sewing by the fire, she heard a low whistle from outside the call of a nightjar, but slightly off. Nokoni stood up immediately and went out into the dark. Hannah went to the window and peered through the curtains. A figure stepped out of the shadows of the barn. It was a woman, dressed in buckskin, with silver ornaments in her hair. It was Lone Star, Nokone's cousin. Hannah strained to hear. They spoke in Comanche, their voices low and urgent. Lone Star gestured angrily toward the house, then toward the horizon. Nokone stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head. Hannah couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Betrayal. Shame. Come home. Finally. Nokone turned away from Lone Star. The woman spat on the ground near his feet and melted back into the darkness. Nokone stayed outside for a long time. When he came back in, his face was drawn. Is everything all right? Hannah asked. My people are hungry, Nokone said simply. They say I sit by the white man's fire and eat fat beef while they hunt rats. We can send them food, Hannah said. We have extra sacks of corn. It is not about the corn, Nokone said, his voice bitter. It is about the chain. They think this marriage is a chain around my neck. They think I have become your dog. You are not my dog, Hannah said fiercely. You are the half-owner of this ranch. To the paper. Yes, Nokone said. To the world I am the savage in the widow's house. He went to his room and closed the door. Hannah wanted to comfort him, but she knew she couldn't. The distance between them was measured in more than just feet. 2 days later, the heat was suffocating. Hannah had been working in the garden and felt covered in grit. She decided to go to the secluded creek behind the ridge to wash. It was a private spot, shielded by willows. She took a towel and a bar of soap. When she pushed through the willow branches, she froze. Nokone was there. He was standing waist-deep in the water, his back to her. He was washing himself. He was naked. Hannah meant to turn around. She meant to leave quietly. But she couldn't move. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling his skin. And on that skin was the history of violence. His back was a map of scars. There were the thin, white lines of knife cuts, the puckered starburst of an old bullet wound near his shoulder blade, and lower down, the crisscrossing welts of a whip marks from the time he had been captured by soldiers years ago. It was a body that had been broken and put back together, made of iron and scar tissue. Nokone must have sensed her, or heard her intake of breath. He turned slowly. He did not scramble for cover. He did not shout. He simply turned and looked at her. Hannah gasped. The scars continued on his chest, though fewer. He stood there, water dripping from his long hair, unashamed of his nakedness, unashamed of his scars. For a moment, Hannah did not see a Comanche. She did not see a business partner. She saw a man who had endured pain she could not imagine and was still standing. Their eyes locked across the 20 feet of water and bank. The air between them crackled with a sudden, undeniable tension. It wasn't just a shock, it was a recognition of shared vulnerability. He was exposing his physical scars. She had been exposing her emotional ones for weeks. I am sorry, Hannah stammered, her face burning. I didn't know. Nokone watched her. His expression softened imperceptibly. He did not mock her embarrassment. The water's cold, he said quietly, but it cleans. He waded toward the bank, picking up his breeches from a rock and stepping into them with a fluid grace before he was fully out of the water. He pulled them up and tied the thong, then picked up his shirt. He walked past her. He was close enough that she could smell the creek water and the scent of his skin clean, earthy, masculine. He paused for a second. My cousin, Lone Star. She was angry because she is afraid, he said, continuing their conversation from 2 nights ago, as if no interruption had occurred. She thinks I will forget who I am. He looked at Hannah, his eyes intense. I have not forgotten, but I am learning that who I am might be more than just a warrior. He walked away toward the house, leaving Hannah standing by the willows, her heart pounding in her throat. The image of his scarred back burned into her mind forever. She realized then that she was no longer afraid of him, and that terrified her more than anything else. The loss of the cattle was subtle at first, like the slow erosion of a riverbank. 10 heads here, 5 heads there, but by the middle of July, The tally book did not lie. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, the ledger open before her, the numbers swimming in the lamplight. 150 heads of prime beef were gone. "It is not wolves," Nokoni said. He was standing by the window, sharpening his knife with a rhythmic shick-shick sound. "Wolves leave bones. These cattle have vanished into the air." "Rustlers," Hannah said, rubbing her temples. "But who we patrol the south fence every day?" "They are not going south," Nokoni said. He sheathed the knife and turned to her. "The tracks are covered well, but the grass remembers. I found drag marks near the dry wash. Someone is moving them in small groups, driving them hard over the stone ground to hide the trail. We need to go higher. Higher. Mesa Ridge." Nokoni said, "From the high ground, we can see the whole valley. We can see where the dust rises." Hannah looked at him. Since the incident at the creek, a strange, electric tension had settled between them. They moved around each other carefully, like two loaded pistols left on a table. The memory of his scarred back and the look in his eyes had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened. "We leave at dawn," Hannah decided. "If someone is stealing our livelihood, I want to see their faces." The drive to Mesa Ridge took the better part of the day. The heat was oppressive, pressing down on the sagebrush until the air shimmered. They rode in silence. The only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills of the ridge. The terrain was rough, a tangle of scrub oak and sharp limestone rocks. As they ascended, the sky to the west began to bruise. Great towers of anvil-shaped clouds piled up, turning from white to an ominous, bruised purple. "A storm is coming," Nokoni said, looking up. "A bad one." "We can make the summit before it breaks," Hannah said, urging her horse forward. She was desperate to find answers. "No," Nokoni said, reaching out to grab her bridle. His hand was warm through the leather rein. "The lightning strikes the high ground first. We need shelter. Now!" Hannah looked at the sky. The wind had died suddenly, creating a vacuum of silence that was more terrifying than the thunder. The air smelled of metallic ozone and wet dust. "There." Nokoni pointed to a depression in the landscape where a solitary, gnarled cottonwood tree grew beside a dry creek bed. Shielded by a shelf of rock, they made it just as the sky opened up. It was not rain. It was a deluge. The water fell in sheets, turning the dust to slick red mud in seconds. They hobbled the horses under the overhang of the rock and huddled beneath the thick canopy of the cottonwood. The temperature plummeted, dropping 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. Nokoni worked quickly, gathering dry wood from the underside of fallen logs and clearing a space against the rock wall. He struck a match, cupping the flame with his hands until the tinder caught. The fire was small, but it pushed back the encroaching dark. Night fell prematurely, swallowed by the storm. The thunder was a physical blow, shaking the ground beneath them. Hannah sat close to the fire, shivering. She had forgotten her heavy coat in the rush, wearing only a linen shirt and her riding vest. Nokoni watched her, without a word. He unrolled his bedroll and took out a heavy wool blanket. It was woven with the patterns of his people, red, black, and gray. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You will be cold," Hannah said, her teeth chattering. He was wearing only his buckskin shirt. "I am used to the cold," Nokoni said. "Take it." Hannah took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke, sage, and him. The scent was overpowering, wrapping her in a comfort she hadn't realized she was craving. They sat in the small circle of light, the storm raging around them like a beast trying to claw its way in. "I hate storms," Hannah whispered, staring into the flames. "The thunder is just the spirits playing drums," Nokoni said softly. "Why do you fear it?" "It reminds me of the fire," Hannah said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She had never told anyone in Red Rock Crossing about this. Not even James had known the full extent of it. "Tell me," Nokoni said. It was not a command, but an invitation. "I was 10 years old," Hannah said, pulling the blanket tighter. We lived in Ohio. My father was a carpenter. One night, a summer storm like this came. Lightning struck the barn. The hay went up like oil. The wind blew the fire to the house. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. I was the only one who made it out the window. My parents, my little brother. The roof collapsed before they could get to the door. I stood in the rain and watched my whole world burn to ash. Nokoni was silent. He did not offer empty platitudes. He picked up a stick and poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. "That is why you hold on to the ranch so tight," he said. "It is not just land. It is a wall against the fire." "Yes," Hannah said. She looked at him. The firelight danced across his high cheekbones, casting his eyes in shadow. "And you, what do you fear, Nokoni? You fight men twice your size. You stare down the judge. Do you fear anything?" Nokoni laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I fear schools." Hannah blinked. "Schools?" "When I was 12, Nokoni said, his voice dropping low. "The soldiers came to our winter camp. They did not kill us that day. They took the children. They said it was for our own good, to save the man. Kill the Indian." He touched the long braid that hung over his shoulder. "They took me to a brick building in the east. It smelled of lye soap and misery. The first thing they did was cut my hair." Hannah knew the significance. For a Comanche, hair was strength. It was spirit. "I cried," Nokoni admitted, his eyes distant. "I fought them, and they beat me. And then they cut it anyway. They took my clothes. They forbade me to speak my tongue. They gave me the name Noah and told me Nokoni was dead. For 3 years, I lived in a box. I marched in lines. I prayed to a God who looked like the men who stole me." He looked at Hannah. "I ran away when I was 15. I walked 500 miles to find my people, but when I came back, I was different. I knew how to read their books. I knew how to count their money. I belonged nowhere. Too white for the tribe, too red for the town." Hannah felt a pang of sorrow so acute it pierced her own grief. She reached out, her hand emerging from the blanket, and touched his arm. The muscle beneath the buckskin was hard, tense. "We are both ghosts, then?" Hannah whispered. "Haunting a world that burned us down." Nokoni turned to look at her. The distance between them had vanished. The storm outside was forgotten. There was only the fire, the smell of rain, and the man who understood her broke in pieces because his own were just as sharp. Hannah shivered, but not from the cold. The air between them was suddenly thick, charged with something dangerous and inevitable. "You are cold," Nokoni said. He moved closer, not touching her, but shielding her from the wind with his body. "No," Hannah breathed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up at him. "Nokoni, do you hate me because I am one of them, because my skin is the color of the people who cut your hair?" Nokoni looked down at her. His eyes were dark pools, bottomless and intense. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before his fingers brushed the side of her neck. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "I hate the men who steal," Nokoni whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I hate the men who lie. I hate the chains they try to put on the earth." He leaned in closer. Hannah could feel the heat radiating from him. She could smell the rain on his hair. "But you..." Nokoni's voice broke slightly. "You are the bread in the snow. You are the fire in the storm." He did not finish. He did not need to. Hannah made a small sound in her throat and leaned into his hand. It was permission. It was a plea. Nokoni lowered his head. His lips brushed hers. Tentative at first. A question asked in the silence of the prairie. Hannah gasped, her hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt. That small movement shattered the dam. Nokoni groaned low in his chest and crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the starving desperation of two people who had been alone for a lifetime. It was the young Comanche's first kiss, and it lit the silent prairie afire. Hannah opened to him, the taste of him wild and smoky on her tongue. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, but she did not feel the cold. His hands were in her hair, tangled in the blonde waves, pulling her closer until there was no air left between them. She felt the rough buckskin of his shirt against her chest, the hardness of his chest, the pounding of his heart that matched her own. For a moment, there was no ranch, no Crowley, no law. There was only the fire and the storm, and the man who tasted like salvation. They broke apart gasping, foreheads resting against each other. Hannah's hands were trembling where they rested on his chest. Nokone's breathing was ragged. They stared at each other, the reality of what they had done crashing down around them. "We had an agreement," Hannah whispered, her voice shaking. "A business arrangement." Nokone pulled back slightly. His eyes were blazing, wild and unguarded. The agreement was for their law, Hannah, for the judge, for the town. He ran his thumb over her swollen lip. What just happened? This is ours." Hannah looked at him, terrified and exhilarated. She wanted to pull him back. She wanted to drag him down onto the blanket and forget the world. But the ghost of James, the ghost of her reputation, the ghost of the danger they were in, it all stood in the shadows. "We cannot," Hannah said, pulling the blanket back up, shielding herself. "If we do this, it complicates everything. It makes us vulnerable." Nokone watched her retreat. The mask slowly slid back into place, but his eyes remained hot. "We are already vulnerable," he said. He stood up and moved to the other side of the fire. He sat down, his back to the flames, his back to her. "Sleep," he said. "I will watch the fire." They did not sleep. Hannah lay wrapped in his blanket, listening to the rain slow to a drizzle. She could feel his presence across the fire like a gravitational pull. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that everything had changed. The wall she had built around her heart had not just been breached, it had been leveled. The morning sun broke over Mesa Ridge with a clarity that hurt the eyes. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving the red earth vibrant and the sagebrush glistening. Hannah and Nokone moved around the camp in a stiff, awkward silence. They avoided looking at each other, but every accidental touch passing the coffee pot, packing the saddlebags, sent a jolt through them. "We need to ride to the ridge," Nokone said finally, his voice rough. They mounted up and rode the final mile to the summit. From the edge of the mesa, the entire valley spread out below them like a map. Nokone pulled out a brass spyglass, one of the few things James had left him personally. He scanned the valley floor. "There," he said, handing the glass to Hannah. She raised it to her eye. In a box canyon 3 miles to the west, on land that was technically open range but bordered Crowley's property, she saw a herd of cattle. They were penned in a makeshift corral hidden by scrub oak. "Are they ours?" Hannah asked. "Look at the fire pit," Nokone said. Hannah adjusted the focus. She saw 3 men working near a branding fire. They were roping a steer. She saw the flash of the hot iron. "They are rebranding them," Hannah breathed. "Changing the SM brand to a Circle C. And look at the tracks." Nokone pointed to the ground leading away from the canyon. Even from this distance, the deep ruts of heavy wagons were visible in the mud. "Those tracks go straight to Crowley's main barn. He's not just stealing them, he is moving them." "Why?" Hannah lowered the glass. "He has thousands of heads. Why steal 100 of ours?" "To hide them," Nokone said, his face darkening. "Or to plant them. Plant them. If he moves them across the river," Nokone said, pointing to the south. "He puts them on Comanche hunting grounds. Then he calls the army and says the Indians stole them." Hannah felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "He frames your people. He gets the army to clear the land and he takes the ranch." "We have to go back," Nokone said, wheeling his horse around. "We have to tell the sheriff. Tell the judge." "They won't believe us," Hannah said. "Not without proof, but we have to try." The ride back to Red Rock Crossing was a race. They pushed the horses hard, arriving in town just after noon. But the town was already buzzing. As they rode down the main street, Hannah noticed a distinct change in the atmosphere. People were gathering in knots on the corners, whispering. The general store was closed, and in front of the sheriff's office, A platoon of cavalry soldiers was mounting up. Captain Walker stood on the boardwalk, talking to Silas Crowley. Deputy Harding was there, looking triumphant. "Captain!" Hannah shouted, reining in her horse. Dust swirled around them. Walker looked up. His face was grim. "Mrs. McKenna, you should be at home. It is not safe." "What is happening?" Hannah demanded, sliding from her saddle. Noconi dismounted beside her, his hand resting on his knife. "We have received a report," Crowley said, stepping forward. He looked fresh, clean, and utterly reptilian. "A tragedy, really. My foreman, breathless and bleeding, rode in an hour ago. He claims a war party of Comanches raided my northern pasture last night, stole 50 heads, burned a line shack." "That is a lie," Hannah shouted. "We were on the ridge. We saw your men rebranding our cattle in the box canyon." Crowley shook his head sadly. "Poor Hannah. The stress has finally broken her. Rebranding my men are loyal citizens." "It is true," Noconi said, stepping forward. "The tracks lead to Crowley's land. The cattle are there." "Silence! Savage!" Harding barked. "We have a witness who saw you leading the raid." "Me?" Noconi looked at him, incredulous. "I was with her, all night. Likely story," Harding sneered. "Or maybe she was with you while you did it, conspiring with the enemy." Captain Walker raised a hand. "Enough, Noconi. We have reports of stolen stock moving toward the Quahati encampment. I have orders to retrieve that property and punish the raiders." "There are no raiders," Hannah pleaded, grabbing Walker's sleeve. "Captain, please, it is a setup. Crowley wants the water rights. He is trying to start a war to get it." Walker looked at her, then at Crowley. There was doubt in his eyes, but duty was stronger. "I have my orders. Mrs. McKenna, I cannot ignore a report of violence against settlers. We rode to the Comanche camp in 1 hour. If you ride there," Noconi said, his voice low and dangerous, "you ride into a slaughter. My people are not prepared for war. There are women and children there." "Then they should not have stolen my cattle," Crowley said, lighting a cigar. Noconi looked at Hannah. The realization hit them both at the same time. The trap had sprung. If the army attacked the camp, the Comanches would fight back. People would die. And, in the chaos, Crowley would get everything he wanted. "You have to stop them," Hannah whispered to Noconi. "They will not listen to me." Noconi said. He looked at the soldiers checking their carbines. "I have to warn the tribe." "If you leave," Crowley said, overhearing them, "you prove your guilt. You flee the jurisdiction. You are a fugitive. The marriage is annulled. The land is forfeit." It was the ultimate checkmate. Stay and keep the ranch, but let his people die, or go save his people, and lose everything he had promised James he would protect. Noconi looked at the courthouse where he had made his vow. He looked at the ranch in the distance, and then he looked at Hannah. He saw the woman who had kissed him by the fire, the woman who had shared her blanket. "I cannot let them die," Noconi said to her. "James would not want the land stained with blood." "I know," Hannah said. Tears pricked her eyes. "I go," Noconi said. He turned to his horse. "Wait," Hannah said. She grabbed the reins of her own horse. She looked at the town, the people who had turned their backs on her, the law that had failed her, the civilization that was nothing but greed in a suit. "I am coming with you," she said. Noconi froze. "No, you stay. You are safe here. If you ride with me, you are a traitor to your race. There is no coming back from that." "You said it yourself last night," Hannah said, her voice trembling but fierce. "We are ghosts. We have no place here." She swung into the saddle. She looked down at Crowley, whose cigar had fallen from his mouth in shock. "If you want to kill him," Hannah announced to the street, "you will have to shoot through me." She kicked her horse into a gallop. Noconi stared at her for a heartbeat, a look of fierce, agonizing love crossing his face. Then he vaulted onto his paint horse and spurred it after her. They rode out of Red Rock Crossing together, leaving a cloud of red dust and a shocked silence in their wake. They rode toward the canyon, toward the army, toward the war that would decide whether their love and their lives would survive the night. The ride through the darkness was a descent into a world Hannah McKenna had only ever feared. The storm that had birthed their first kiss on the ridge now chased them like a relentless predator. Thunder rolled across the plains, vibrating through the chest of her horse, while jagged forks of lightning illuminated the scrub brush in blinding, stroboscopic flashes. They rode hard, the horses blowing and foaming, their hooves striking sparks against flint. Nokoni led the way, his body low over the neck of his paint horse, merging with the animal in a way Hannah could never hope to mimic. She followed his silhouette, trusting him to find the path through the labyrinth of dry washes and hidden ravines. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the smell of wood smoke cut through the ozone of the storm. Nokoni pulled up sharply on a rise overlooking a deep, bowl-shaped depression in the earth. Hannah reined in beside him, her chest heaving, her hair plastered to her face by sweat and the earlier rain. "Down there," Nokoni said, pointing into the shadows. A flash of lightning tore the sky open. For a second, the Quahadi camp was revealed. Hannah had expected a fortress of war. She had expected to see savage men sharpening axes and dancing around fires. What she saw stopped her breath. It was a village. Dozens of buffalo-hide teepees were arranged in a circle, glowing faintly from the embers of dying fires inside. Dogs barked at the thunder. Horses were picketed in a large herd near the creek. And everywhere, there was the sense of sleeping life families, children, old people. "They look," Hannah started, but the words failed her. "Human," Nokoni finished. His voice edged with bitterness. "Come, we have little time." They descended the slope. As they approached the perimeter, 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness. Young men, armed with rifles, blocked the path. They spoke sharply to Nokoni in Comanche, their eyes darting to Hannah with open hostility. One of them spat on the ground near Hannah's horse. Nokoni answered them in their tongue, his voice hard and commanding. He gestured to the east, where the army would be coming. The guards looked uncertain, their grip on their weapons tightening. "They do not want you here," Nokoni said to Hannah without turning. "They say you are a spy." "Tell them I am the reason they are not dead yet," Hannah said, straightening her spine. A woman emerged from the nearest lodge. It was Lone Star. She wore a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the chill. She looked at Nokoni, then at Hannah, and finally at the angry guards. Lone Star stepped between the guards and Hannah's horse. She spoke clearly, her voice ringing out in the damp air. "She rode with him," Lone Star said in English, likely for Hannah's benefit as much as the warriors. "She left her stone house to ride into the storm. A spy does not put her neck in the noose for the enemy. Let them pass." The guards hesitated, then stepped back, lowering their rifles. Nokoni led Hannah into the center of the camp. The commotion had roused the village. People emerged from their lodges, wrapping blankets around themselves. An old man, his face a map of deep wrinkles, stepped forward. He was the elder, Painted Thunder. Nokoni dismounted and spoke rapidly to the elder. He told of the stolen cattle, the frame-up, and the bluecoats riding hard from the fort with orders to kill. The camp erupted into low, terrified murmurs. Mothers gathered their children close. The men looked toward the horizon, judging the distance and the time. "We must fight," a young warrior shouted. "We cannot outrun the horses of the soldiers with our old ones." "If you fight, you die," Hannah said. She had slid from her saddle, her legs shaking from exhaustion, but her voice was steady. "There are too many of them, and they have a cannon." The camp went silent. All eyes turned to the white woman standing in the mud, her black dress torn, her face pale. "Why do you care?" "White woman," Painted Thunder asked, his English broken and heavy. "Because my husband was a man of peace," Hannah said. "And because the man leading them, Silas Crowley, he is the one who stole the cattle. He wants you dead so he can take the water. He wants me dead so he can take the land." She looked at Nokoni. "We are fighting the same enemy." Painted Thunder looked at Nokoni. "Is this true, grandson. It is true, Nokoni said. We cannot run. We cannot fight them head-on. We must stop them before they strike. How? The young warrior sneered. With words. No, Nokoni said, looking at the tall, dry grass that bordered the eastern edge of the canyon. The wind was picking up, blowing hard from the west, pushing away from the camp and toward the approaching army. With fire! The sun rose bloody and red, illuminating the line of blue coats on the ridge. Captain Walker sat on his horse, peering through his field glasses. Behind him, 200 soldiers waited, their sabers loose in their scabbards, and beside him, looking smug and eager, sat Silas Crowley and Deputy Cole Harding. There they are, Crowley said, pointing a gloved hand toward the camp below. See the cattle near the creek? The brands are obscured, but those are my Herefords. I told you, Captain, thieves. Walker frowned. He saw the cattle. Yes, but he also saw women taking down teepees frantically. He saw children running. This did not look like a war party celebrating a raid. It looked like a village in panic. They are retreating, Walker said. I should send a rider to offer surrender. Surrender. Harding laughed harshly. They murdered a sheriff. They stole property. You offer them surrender. They will shoot your messenger and laugh. Attack now. Captain, while you have the advantage. Walker hesitated. He was a career soldier, a man of honor who had grown tired of the endless, muddy skirmishes of the frontier. I see a white woman down there, Walker said, adjusting his glasses. Crowley stiffened. A hostage. No doubt. Poor Hannah. They must have dragged her with them when she tried to stop them. She does not look like a hostage, Walker muttered. She is mounting a horse. She is riding toward us. Hannah McKenna rode out of the camp alone. She carried no weapon. She held a white piece of cloth, a strip torn from her petticoat tied to a willow branch. She rode halfway up the slope and stopped, waiting between the two armies. Hold fire, Walker ordered. He spurred his horse forward, descending the slope to meet her. Crowley and Harding, exchanging a worried glance, followed close behind. Mrs. McKenna, Walker said when he was within speaking distance. Thank God you are alive. Move aside so we can rescue you. I do not need rescuing, Captain, Hannah said loud enough for the soldiers on the ridge to hear. And those people down there are not thieves. They are victims. Hannah, you are hysterical, Crowley said, his voice dripping with condescension. We saw the cattle. We have the report. The cattle were planted, Hannah shouted, looking directly at the soldiers. Nokoni and I saw Crowley's men rebranding them in the Box Canyon yesterday. We saw the wagon tracks leading to his barn. This is a lie. He wants to start a war to clear the land for his railroad contract. A ripple of unease went through the ranks. Lies of a woman bewitched by a savage. Harding spat. Captain, I have a witness. Bring him up. A ragged, unshaven cowboy was shoved forward from the back of the posse. He refused to look Hannah in the eye. Tell the captain what you saw. Shorty, Harding commanded, his hand resting casually on his pistol grip. I saw him, the cowboy mumbled. Saw that buck, Nokoni. He was leading the raid, burned the shack, laughing about killing white men. Liar, Hannah screamed. Nokoni was with me all night. Doing what, Mrs. McKenna? Crowley asked softly, his voice carrying a poisonous insinuation. Sharing your bed, is that your alibi, that you were whoring for the man who likely killed your husband? Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. The cruelty of the accusation was like a physical blow. Captain, Crowley said. Turning to Walker, the woman is clearly compromised. She is suffering from Stockholm Syndrome or worse. She is obstructing justice. Push her aside and do your duty. Walker looked at Hannah, then at the camp. He saw the stolen cattle. He had a sworn witness. He had the pressure of the wealthy landowner. Mrs. McKenna, Walker said sadly. Move aside. That is a direct order. No, Hannah said. She turned her horse sideways, blocking the path. If you burn this camp, you burn me. Crowley's eyes went cold. He nodded almost imperceptibly to Harding. "Get her out of there, deputy," Crowley said. Harding kicked his horse forward, reaching for Hannah's reins. "Come here, you traitorous bitch." At that moment, the wind moved. A low roar, like the sound of a distant freight train, rose from the canyon floor. "Captain," a soldier on the ridge shouted. "Look!" Behind Hannah, along the base of the slope, a wall of orange fire erupted. Nokoni and the warriors had lit the dry grass. The fierce west wind caught the flames instantly, feeding them oxygen and dead sagebrush. The fire did not move toward the camp. It raced up the slope, straight toward the army. "Fire!" Walker screamed. "Fall back! Fall back!" The horses, smelling the smoke and seeing the wall of flame rushing toward them, panicked. The orderly line of cavalry dissolved into chaos. Men shouted, horses reared, and the formation broke. "It's a trap!" Crowley screamed, his face red with fury. "They are attacking! Kill them! Kill them all!" Through the rising wall of black smoke, figures emerged. The Comanche warriors were not attacking the soldiers. They were riding along the flanks, firing into the air to drive the confusion deeper, using the smoke as a shield. Nokoni burst through the mist on his paint horse, riding straight for Hannah. "Hannah!" he shouted. "Go!" Harding, struggling to control his terrified mount, saw Nokoni. The hatred on the deputy's face twisted into something demonic. He drew his revolver. "You die today, savage!" Harding roared. He leveled the gun at Nokoni's chest. The distance was less than 20 feet. He could not miss. Hannah saw the barrel. She saw the finger tighten on the trigger. She did not think. She did not calculate. She simply threw herself from her saddle, lunging toward Harding's horse. "No!" she screamed. She slammed into the shoulder of Harding's horse just as the gun went off. The impact threw the aim off by inches. The bullet cracked through the air. It missed Nokoni's heart but tore a furrow across his upper arm. Blood sprayed onto the dust. Nokoni jerked back from the impact, almost losing his seat. He saw Hannah fall into the dirt beneath the hooves of the rearing horses. "Hannah!" Nokoni roared, a sound of pure, primal fury. He didn't reach for his rifle. He drove his horse straight into Harding's mount, turning the animal into a battering ram. The collision sent Harding flying from his saddle. He hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him, his gun skittering away into the smoke. Nokoni leaped from his horse. He stood over Hannah, his knife in his hand, his left arm dripping blood. He looked like a demon of the smoke, eyes burning. Crowley saw the tide turning. The soldiers were retreating from the fire. Harding was down. His plan was disintegrating in the ash. He saw Hannah and Nokoni isolated in the smoke, cut off from the main body of the troops. He drew his own pistol, a pearl-handled Colt. "I should have killed you both weeks ago." Crowley snarled. He fired. The bullet kicked up dirt at Nokoni's feet. Nokoni shoved Hannah behind a boulder and sprinted toward Crowley. Crowley fired again, but his hand was shaking. He turned his horse and spurred it toward the high ground, toward the limestone cliffs that overlooked the canyon. He needed distance. He needed to reload. Nokoni found a riderless army horse, vaulted onto its back, and gave chase. "Nokoni, no!" Hannah screamed, scrambling to her feet. She ignored the chaos around her, ignored the heat of the fire that was singing her hair, and ran after them. The chase was short. The cliff edge was a cul-de-sac of stone. Crowley reached the precipice and realized he was trapped. A drop of 300 feet to the rocky riverbed below awaited him. He wheeled his horse around. Nokoni was there, blocking the only exit. Nokoni slid from the horse, his knife in his hand, his chest heaving. "You have nowhere to run." "Crowley," Nokoni said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. Crowley laughed, a frantic, high-pitched sound. He aimed his empty gun, realized it was spent, and threw it at Nokoni. "You think you have won? You are nothing, a savage in a white man's vest." "I am the man who keeps his promises," Nokoni said, stepping closer. "James McKenna was a fool," Crowley shouted, backing up until his horse's hooves clicked on the loose shale of the edge. "He wouldn't sell. I offered him double the market price. He said the land was for the future. He said it was for you people. Hannah, breathless and stumbling, reached the clearing just in time to hear the words. "So you killed him," Hannah whispered. The smoke swirled around her, but her voice cut through it. Crowley looked at her. The mask of the gentleman was gone. There was only the madness of a man who had lost everything. "I had to," Crowley screamed. "He was in the way of progress. He was an obstacle, just like you." Nokoni lunged. He did not strike to kill. He struck to disarm. He grabbed Crowley by the lapels of his expensive gray suit. They grappled on the edge of the abyss. Crowley was heavier, desperate, clawing at Nokoni's wounded arm. Nokoni hissed in pain but did not let go. "Die, you mongrel!" Crowley shrieked, driving a knee into Nokoni's stomach. Nokoni twisted, using Crowley's own momentum against him. He pivoted, slamming Crowley onto the flat rock. "I will not kill you," Nokoni gritted out, holding the knife to Crowley's throat. "You will live. You will rot in a cell. You will tell the world what you did." "Never," Crowley roared. He reached into his boot and pulled out a hidden derringer. "Drop it," a booming voice commanded. Captain Walker emerged from the smoke, his service revolver drawn and leveled. He had followed Hannah. He had heard the confession. Crowley looked at Walker. He looked at the gun. He looked at Nokoni's knife. And he looked at the drop behind him. The realization that his life as a king of the territory was over hit him. The humiliation of prison, of hanging, was too much. "I built this town," Crowley screamed. He jerked his body violently, trying to throw Nokoni off, but in his panic, his boot heel slipped on the loose shale. Nokoni tried to hold him. He grabbed Crowley's sleeve. The fabric tore. Crowley's eyes went wide. For a second, he hung suspended in the air, a look of absolute disbelief on his face. Then he was gone. There was no scream, just the sound of wind and the distant crash of a body hitting the rocks far below. Nokoni stood on the edge, breathing hard, the piece of gray wool cloth still clutched in his hand. Silence descended on the cliff. The wind blew the smoke away, revealing the blue sky above. Captain Walker holstered his gun. He walked to the edge and looked down, then looked at Nokoni. "I heard him," Walker said quietly. "I heard him admit to the murder of Sheriff McKenna." Nokoni dropped the cloth. He turned to look at Hannah. She was standing 10 feet away, her face streaked with soot and tears. She looked at his bleeding arm. She looked at his eyes. "It is over," Nokoni said. Hannah ran to him. She did not care about the captain. She did not care about the soldiers gathering behind them or the warriors watching from the slopes. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest. Nokoni wrapped his good arm around her, holding her so tight it hurt. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of smoke and survival. "I am sorry," he whispered into her ear. "I am sorry I brought you into the fire." Hannah pulled back just enough to look at him. She reached up and touched the blood on his arm. "No," she said, her voice fierce. "This is our fire. This is our war. They killed my husband. They tried to kill us, but they did not win." She kissed him. It was brief, hard, and tasted of salt and ash. Captain Walker cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, but there was a new respect in his eyes. "The fire is dying down," Walker said formally. "I will order my men to help dig fire breaks to protect the camp. We have a lot of statements to take. Mrs. McKenna." "Yes," Hannah said, not letting go of Nokoni's hand. "We have a lot to say." She looked out over the valley. The smoke was clearing. The ranch was still there in the distance, shimmering in the heat. It was scarred, just like them, but it was still standing. Nokoni looked at his people down in the canyon. They were safe. The army was putting down their rifles and picking up shovels. He looked at Hannah. For the first time, he did not see a division between his world and hers. He saw only the woman who had jumped in front of a bullet for him. "Let us go home," he said. "Yes," Hannah replied. "Let us go home." The smoke from the fire hung over the canyon for 3 days, a gray shroud that smelled of burnt sage and the bitter residue of gunpowder. The firebreak dug by the soldiers and the warriors working side by side had held, saving the main camp, but the grazing land to the east was a blackened scar stretching for miles. Captain Walker sat in his field tent, which had been erected near the blackened perimeter. The oil lamp on his desk flickered, casting long shadows against the canvas walls. He dipped his pen into the inkwell and paused. The document before him was not merely a report. It was an indictment of the most powerful men in the territory. He wrote the date July the 16th, 1878. He wrote of the branded cattle found on Silas Crowley's land. He wrote of the confession he had heard on the cliff edge, the admission of the murder of Sheriff James McKenna. He wrote of the unwarranted aggression instigated by Deputy Cole Harding, and of the actions of Noconi and Hannah McKenna, which he classified not as rebellion, but as necessary measures for the preservation of life. Walker blotted the ink carefully. He knew this paper would end his career in this district. The politicians in Washington did not like heroes who exposed the rot in their own expansion plans. But as he looked out the tent flap and saw a Comanche woman offering a ladle of water to a soot-stained private, he knew he had no other choice. The investigation that followed was swift, driven by the explosive nature of Walker's report and the vacuum of power left by Crowley's death. The body of Silas Crowley had been recovered from the rocks below the cliff, broken and twisted, a grim testament to the price of ambition. Red Rock Crossing was in a state of shock. The saloon, usually a hive of noise, was subdued. Men spoke in hushed tones, eyeing the sheriff's office where Deputy Harding sat in a cell, stripped of his badge, awaiting transport to the federal penitentiary. Judge Halford had barricaded himself in his home. The rumors of his complicity were spreading like the fire on the plains. He paced his study, the curtains drawn, pouring glass after glass of whiskey, jumping at every knock on the door. He knew it was only a matter of time before the federal marshals arrived to ask difficult questions about land deeds and sealed wills. Reverend Pike stood in the pulpit of the White Timber Church on Sunday morning. The pews were full, but the faces looking up at him were different. There was confusion there, and judgment. For years, he had preached that the white man was the shepherd and the Indian the wolf. Now, the wolf had saved the flock, and the shepherd had been revealed as a butcher. Pike opened his Bible, his hands trembling. He looked for a passage about righteous war, but his eyes kept falling on verses about false prophets. He closed the book. "We have been blind," Pike said, his voice cracking. "We have let pride be our guide, and it has led us into the ditch. Pray for discernment. Pray for forgiveness." He stepped down from the pulpit without finishing the sermon. The official hearing took place 10 days after the battle. It was held not in the courthouse, which was deemed a crime scene of corruption, but in the town meeting hall. A federal magistrate had arrived from Santa Fe to preside over the chaos. Noconi sat at the defendant's table. He wore a clean shirt Hannah had bought him, but he refused to cut his hair. His left arm was in a sling, the white bandage stark against his skin. Hannah sat beside him, her hand resting openly on his knee. The town was divided. Half the room looked at Noconi with the old hatred, whispering that he was an arsonist who should be hanged. The other half, mostly the smaller ranchers who had been squeezed by Crowley for years, looked at him with a grudging curiosity. "The charge is inciting a riot and destruction of federal property," the magistrate read, looking over his spectacles. "Specifically, the burning of 3,000 acres of territorial grazing land." Captain Walker took the stand first. He stood tall in his dress uniform. "The fire was a tactical necessity, Your Honor," Walker stated clearly. "Had the defendant not created that barrier, my troops would have advanced into a fortified position. There would have been significant casualties on both sides. Furthermore, the fire prevented Mr. Crowley and Deputy Harding from executing an unlawful order to massacre noncombatants." "Unlawful order?" the magistrate asked. "The order was based on fabricated evidence provided by the late Mr. Crowley," Walker said. "Evidence designed to conceal his own theft of livestock and his involvement in the murder of Sheriff McKenna." The courtroom buzzed. The confirmation of James's murder in open court hit the town like a physical blow. Then, it was Hannah's turn. She walked to the stand, her head high. She wore her widow's black. But she had pinned a small silver brooch to her collar, a Comanche design given to her by Lone Star. "Mrs. McKenna," the magistrate said gently. "You were present at the cliff." "I was," Hannah said. Her voice did not waver. "Tell us what you heard." Hannah looked out at the crowd. She saw the faces of the women who had shunned her in the market. She saw the shopkeepers who had turned their backs. "Silas Crowley confessed to me, and to my husband," she said, gesturing to Noconi. "He admitted that he staged the ambush that killed James. He did it because James refused to sell Silver Mesa Ranch. He did it because James believed that this land was big enough for both peoples." She took a breath. "For weeks, you have called me a traitor. You have called me names in the street because I married a Comanche. You said I dishonored James's memory." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "James McKenna loved this man." She pointed to Noconi. "He called him brother. He left him half the ranch because he knew Noconi was the only one strong enough to protect it from the greed that rots this town. The man you call a savage saved your sons in the army from becoming murderers. He saved me, and he saved the truth. But he started a fire. Mrs. McKenna," the magistrate pressed. "That is a crime. He burned the grass to save the blood." Hannah shot back. "If that is a crime, then arrest me too. I rode with him. I handed him the match." It was a lie she hadn't lit the match, but the solidarity was absolute. The magistrate looked at her, then at Noconi, then at Captain Walker. He banged his gavel. "In light of the extenuating circumstances, and the testimony regarding the criminal conspiracy led by Silas Crowley, the charges against Noconi are dismissed on grounds of self-defense and the defense of others." The gavel came down. It was not a cheer that went up, but a collective exhale. "However," the magistrate added, looking sternly at Noconi, "the damages to the grazing land must be addressed, and the status of the Comanche encampment is complicated." The settlement took another week of negotiation. The Indian agent, Grady, who had been taking bribes from Crowley to look the other way, was summarily fired and replaced by a nervous young clerk from the east. The deal that was struck was not perfect. It was a compromise, forged in the reality of the frontier. The Comanche camp could not stay in the burnt canyon. The grass was gone, and the game had fled. They would have to move north, toward the reservation line. But in exchange for their cooperation and Noconi's assistance in exposing the cattle theft ring, a concession was made. Silver Mesa Ranch was officially recognized as the joint property of Hannah McKenna and Noconi. The deed was stamped and sealed, irrevocable. Furthermore, a clause was added allowing the Quahati Band seasonal grazing rights on the southern portion of the ranch, the land with the best water access. It was a small victory in a losing war for the tribe, but it was survival. Noconi stood on the boardwalk outside the lawyer's office, the signed papers in his hand. He watched his people packing their travois, preparing for the long walk north. Lone Star rode up to him. She looked at the stone building, then at Noconi. "You stay?" she asked in their tongue. "I'll stay." Noconi replied, "The paper is signed. If I leave, the paper burns. I must hold the ground." "You are not white, Noconi," she said, her eyes sad. "But you are no longer fully Quahati. You are the bridge, and people walk on bridges." "Then I will be strong enough to bear the weight," Noconi said. She reached out and touched his hand. "Watch the woman. She has a warrior's heart." "I know," Noconi said. He watched them ride out, a long line of dust moving against the setting sun. He felt a tearing in his chest, the old wound of abandonment opening again. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Hannah stood beside him. She did not say anything. She just stood there, watching the dust with him, her presence a solid anchor in the shifting world. The return to Silver Mesa Ranch that evening was quiet. The adrenaline of the battle and the court had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. The house was cool and dark. Hannah lit the lamps while Nokoni went to check the horses. When he came back inside, he looked pale. The wound on his arm, though stitched by the army surgeon, was throbbing. "Sit," Hannah commanded, pointing to the chair by the fire. Nokoni sank into it with a groan he tried to suppress. "It is nothing, just a scratch. It is a bullet furrow, and it is bleeding again," Hannah said. She brought a basin of warm water and clean strips of linen. She knelt beside the chair. "Take off your shirt," she said. Nokoni hesitated, then awkwardly pulled the buckskin shirt over his head. Hannah winced. The bandage was soaked through with fresh blood. "I moved too much today," Nokoni admitted. "You are stubborn," Hannah said softly. She began to peel away the old dressing. Her touch was professional, steady, but there was a tenderness in her fingers that went beyond nursing. When the wound was exposed, she cleaned it carefully. Nokoni sat stoically, his jaw tight, staring into the fire. "Does it hurt?" Hannah asked, applying a fresh poultice. "The arm is fine," Nokoni said. He looked at her. "The heart is heavy." Hannah paused, her hands resting on his bare skin. "Because they left. Because I did not go with them," Nokoni said. "I chose this. I chose the house of stone over the open sky. You chose to save them," Hannah corrected. "If you had gone, the ranch would be sold. Crowley's men would fence the water. They would have no place to come back next winter." She finished tying the bandage. Then, instead of pulling away, she moved her hand to his other shoulder, the one that wasn't wounded, but was tense as a bowstring. She began to massage the muscle, her thumbs working out the knots of stress. "You are the bridge, Nokoni," Hannah whispered, echoing Lone Star's words, though she hadn't heard them. "And I am the piling on the other side. We hold it up together." Nokoni turned his head. His face was inches from hers. The firelight softened the sharp angles of his profile. "Hannah," he said. It was not a question, but a declaration. He reached out with his good hand and touched her arm, the one she had injured when she tackled the deputy's horse. "You are hurt too," he said. "Just a bruise," Hannah said. "Show me," Nokoni said. Hannah rolled up her sleeve. Her forearm was a canvas of purple and yellow bruising where she had impacted the animal's muscle. It looked painful. Nokoni hissed softly. He dipped a cloth in the warm water and gently laid it over the bruise. He held it there, his large, dark hand covering her pale, damaged skin. "You jumped," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You jumped in front of a gun." "I couldn't let him kill you," Hannah said simply. "Why?" Nokoni asked. "The agreement. It was just business." Hannah looked him in the eye. The pretense of the business arrangement lay in ashes on the floor, burned up with the grass in the canyon. "It stopped being business the night of the storm," Hannah said. "Or maybe it stopped being business the moment you walked into that courtroom and saved me." Nokoni looked at her. The gratitude in his eyes shifted into something deeper, something hungrier. "I have no dowry," Nokoni said quietly. "I have no horses to give your father. I have only scars and half a ranch." "I don't want horses," Hannah whispered. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I want a man who knows the song of the earth. I want the man who keeps his promises." Nokoni closed his eyes and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He leaned into her touch, surrendering the weight he had carried alone for so long. "I am here," he whispered. "I am yours." They sat there for a long time in the silence of the ranch house. It was not the awkward, terrified silence of their wedding night. It was a companionable silence, a silence that breathed. Outside, the wind blew across the prairie, but the house stood firm. The ghosts of the past James, the fire, the massacre were still there, but they were retreating into the shadows. "Tomorrow," Nokoni said, finally opening his eyes, "we must fix the south fence. The cattle will wander if we do not." Hannah smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Tomorrow, but tonight we rest." She stood up and held out her hand to him. "Come, you cannot sleep in the chair." Nokoni looked at her hand, Then he looked at the bedroom door, the door Hannah had locked on their first night. "The door is open?" he asked. "The door is open," Hannah said. Nokoni took her hand. He stood up, and together they walked toward the bedroom. The divide was gone. The bridge was built, and though the world outside was still hard and unforgiving, inside the walls of Silver Mesa, the war was finally over. 6 months had passed since the fire at the canyon, and the season had turned. The blistering heat of summer had surrendered to the golden, crisp embrace of autumn. The cottonwood trees along the creek were turning a brilliant yellow, their leaves shimmering like gold coins against the vast, azure sky. Silver Mesa Ranch had changed, too. It was no longer the silent fortress of a grieving widow, nor the contested battleground of a range war. It had become something new, something that defied the rigid lines drawn on the maps of the territory. On the front porch of the main house, the American flag snapped briskly in the wind, its red and white stripes bright against the weathered timber. But just a few feet away, hanging from the eaves, was a dream catcher the size of a wagon wheel, decorated with eagle feathers and beads of turquoise and silver. The two symbols moved in the same wind, occasionally brushing against each other, existing in a harmony that the politicians in Washington would have deemed impossible. In the corral, the sounds of work had a different rhythm. It was not just the shout of cowboys driving stock. There was laughter. "Keep your heels down, little hawk, like roots going into the earth." Nokoni stood in the center of the training ring, watching a 7-year-old boy cling to the back of a patient Mustang pony. The boy, Little Hawk or Sam, as Hannah had started calling him after her late father was an orphan from the Quahati Band. His parents had been lost to smallpox the winter before, and when the tribe moved north to the reservation, Lone Star had asked if he could stay. "He has the spirit of a wild colt," she had said. "He needs a place where he can run, but also a fence to keep him safe." Hannah leaned against the fence, watching them. She wore a simple calico dress, but her boots were dusty, and her hands were rough from work. She smiled as Nokoni walked over to the boy, adjusting his grip on the reins with a gentleness that still surprised her. "He learns fast," Hannah called out. "He listens," Nokoni corrected. Walking over to the fence, he took off his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Unlike some people I know," Hannah laughed. It was a sound that had returned to her slowly, like birdsong after a storm. "I listen. I just choose when to obey." "A dangerous quality in a horse," Nokoni said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But a necessary one in a wife." The ranch was bustling. A few Comanche families, those who had obtained passes from the new Indian agent to travel for seasonal work, were helping repair the storm damage to the barn. In exchange, they received sacks of flour, coffee, and salt to take back to their kin. It was a barter system born of necessity, but it had grown into a fragile trust. Inside the house, the lines between the two worlds blurred even further. Lone Star sat by the hearth, mending a quilt while Miss Eliza Carter, the town school teacher, sat opposite her, holding a primer. "A apple," Eliza articulated clearly. "A apple," Lone Star repeated, her accent thick but her determination clear. Eliza had started coming out on Saturdays. Initially, it was to check on Hannah, driven by curiosity and Christian charity, but she had stayed for the tea, and for the realization that the savages she had read about in penny dreadfuls were women who worried about their children's coughs and the coming winter. Just like her. "The town is talking, you know," Eliza said, snapping the book shut, "about the school board meeting next week." "Let them talk," Hannah said, entering the room and pouring water from a pitcher. "Talk does not build fences. They are saying," Eliza continued, a mischievous glint in her eye, "that I intend to allow Little Hawk to sit in the back row of the classroom come January." "And do you?" Hannah asked. "Certainly not," Eliza sniffed. "His eyesight is poor. I intend to put him in the front row." Hannah smiled at her friend. The frost of Red Rock Crossing was thawing. It was a slow thaw, measurable in inches rather than miles, but the ice was breaking. The shift was visible when Hannah and Nokoni rode into town later that week to pick up supplies. They still drew looks. There were still men who spat on the boardwalk as they passed, and women who pulled their skirts aside. The shadow of the war and the deep-seated prejudices of the frontier would not vanish in a season. But as they pulled the wagon up to the blacksmith shop, Mr. Henderson, a man with arms like tree trunks and a beard like steel wool, stepped out. He had been one of the loudest voices calling for Nokoni's hanging 6 months ago. He looked at the broken axle Hannah had brought in. He looked at Nokoni, who sat stoically on the wagon seat. Storm did a number on the road near the pass. Henderson grunted. It did, Nokoni agreed. The mud is deep. Henderson nodded. He wiped his hands on his apron. I can have this fixed by 3 o'clock. Cost you $2. Fair price, Nokoni said. Henderson paused. He looked at the scar on Nokoni's arm, visible below his rolled-up sleeve. Heard you pulled my nephew out of the fire line at the canyon. Private Miller. He was slow, Nokoni said simply, but he ran well enough when the heat rose. Henderson let out a short bark of a laugh. He extended a soot-stained hand. I'm obliged to you. For the boy. Nokoni looked at the hand. Then he reached down and shook it. It was a brief contact, gritty and hard, but it was the first time a white man in the town had touched him with anything other than a fist or a shackle. 3 o'clock, Henderson said, turning back to his forge. As they walked to the general store, Hannah slipped her arm through Nokoni's. That was something? He still charges too much for iron, Nokoni noted dryly, though he walked a little taller. That evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the prairie in hues of violet and burnt orange, Hannah and Nokoni stood on the wide porch of the ranch house. The work was done. The cattle were lowing softly in the south pasture. The air was filled with the smell of wood smoke and roasting venison. Hannah leaned against the railing, looking at the piece they had carved out of the chaos. Do you remember the day at the courthouse? Hannah asked softly. I remember the chains, Nokoni said, standing behind her, his presence a warm wall against the evening chill. I remember the cold, Hannah said. It was the coldest ceremony I have ever known. It was a contract signed on ice. She turned to face him. He was no longer the ragged prisoner. He was the master of Silver Mesa. His hair was still long, but he wore a clean linen shirt and a vest of tanned leather. He was a man who walked in 2 worlds. I do not want that to be our memory, Hannah said. The law required a wedding. But the law did not make us this. What are we? Nokoni asked, his eyes searching hers. We are the fire in the storm, Hannah whispered. We are the bridge, but I want us to be a family. Officially, not for the judge, not for the land deed, for us. Nokoni took her hand. His thumb traced the gold band she still wore James's ring. You want a white wedding? Nokoni asked, with the black book and the grim words. No? Hannah shook her head. I want a wedding on earth, a wedding of the wind. I want to say the words because I mean them, not because Crowley is watching. Nokoni smiled. Then we will have it. The ceremony took place 3 days later, on a Sunday. It was not held in the church, nor in the courthouse. It was held under the great cottonwood tree near the creek, the same place they had sheltered during the storm that changed everything. It was a strange and beautiful gathering. Painted Thunder had returned from the north with a small delegation of elders. Lone Star and Little Hawk were there, dressed in their finest buckskins adorned with beads. But there were others, too. Miss Eliza Carter wore her Sunday best. Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, stood awkwardly at the back, holding his hat. A dozen other ranchers and their wives, those who had tired of the hate, had come. There was no priest. There was no judge. Hannah wore a dress of pale blue cream, embroidered with wildflowers. In her hair, she wore a single eagle feather. Nokoni wore his finest leathers, but over his heart, he had pinned the silver star that had belonged to James. It was not worn as a badge of authority, but as a badge of honor. They stood before the tree. Nokoni spoke first. He spoke in Comanche, then in English. I, Nokoni, of the Quahati people. Take you, Hannah, of the Stonehouse people. I take you as the sky takes the sun. I take you as the river takes the rain. I promise to be your shield when the arrows fly. I promise to be your fire when the winter bites. I will not walk in front of you. I will not walk behind you. I will walk beside you until the grass does not grow and the water does not run. Hannah's eyes were bright with tears. She held his hands, feeling the calluses that mapped their hard labor. Hannah, take you, Nokoni. I take you not to save my land, but to save my heart. I promise to honor your spirit. I promise to keep your history alive. You are my home, wherever you are. That is my country. They did not exchange rings. Instead, Nokoni tied a leather cord around Hannah's wrist, and she tied a silk ribbon around a binding of two materials, distinct but knotted together. Now we dance, Lone Star shouted, breaking the solemnity. A drum began to beat a deep, resonant sound like a heartbeat, and then a fiddle joined in. One of the old ranchers had brought his violin. The two sounds, the Comanche drum and the Irish fiddle, struggled for a moment to find a rhythm, then locked into a strange, galloping harmony. It was joyous. It was chaotic. It was the sound of the West changing. As the dancing began, a buggy pulled up on the ridge. A solitary figure in black stepped out. It was Reverend Pike. The music faltered slightly. People watched him. He had not stepped foot on the ranch since the funeral of James McKenna. He walked slowly down the slope. He looked older, his face lined with the struggle of a man whose worldview had been shattered. He stopped a few feet from Hannah and Nokoni. Nokoni stepped forward, shielding Hannah instinctively. "Reverend," Nokoni said. "I did not come to preach," Pike said, his voice raspy. He looked at the mixed crowd, the painted faces and the sunbonnets, the drum and the fiddle. "I came to see." "And what do you see?" Hannah asked. Pike looked at the dream catcher hanging from the tree branch. He looked at the scars on Nokoni's arm. He looked at the joy on the face of the orphan boy. "Little Hawk." "I see that the Lord works in mysteries I was too proud to understand," Pike whispered. He took off his hat. "I judged this house. I called it a den of iniquity. But I see fruit on the vine here. I see peace where I sowed discord." He looked at Nokoni. "I cannot undo the words I spoke, but if the God of Abraham and the Great Spirit of your people are both listening, I would like to ask for a blessing from this union." Nokoni nodded slowly. "The air is free, Reverend. Prayers carry." Pike bowed his head. "Bless this house, bless this land, and forgive us our trespasses, as we learn to forgive those who trespass against us." He did not stay for the food, but he shook Nokoni's hand before he left. It was the final surrender of the old guard. The feast that evening was a triumph. There was roasted beef from the ranch and venison brought by the hunters. There was cornbread and fry bread. They sat at long tables set up under the stars. The conversation was loud and boisterous. Lone Star leaned over to Nokoni, gesturing with a turkey leg. "Brother, look at you. You look like a fat settler." "I am not fat," Nokoni protested, though he was smiling. "I am prosperous." "You are caught," Lone Star teased, her eyes dancing. "The white woman threw her rope, and you stood still for it." The table went quiet, waiting for his reaction. Nokoni looked at Hannah across the table. The firelight danced in her hair. She was laughing at something Mr. Henderson was saying. "No," Nokoni said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "We did not rope each other. We chose to tie ourselves together." He looked at the leather cord on his wrist. "The rope that binds a man to a duty is heavy. The rope that binds a man to a woman he loves, that is what pulls him up when he falls." Hannah heard him. She looked up, her expression softening. "The West is wild," she said to the group. "We spend so much time building fences to keep things out. Maybe freedom is opening the gate. Maybe it is learning to live in the open, without fear." "To the open gate, mister," Henderson toasted, raising his tin cup. "To the open gate," the table roared. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lanterns had been extinguished, Hannah and Nokoni saddled their horses. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked, though she suspected she knew. "To the beginning," Nokoni said. They rode out under the canopy of 1,000,000,000 stars. The Milky Way was a river of diamond dust spilled across the ink-black sky. The air was cold, crisp with the coming winter, but they were dressed in heavy coats lined with sheepskin. They climbed the winding trail to Mesa Ridge. The silence of the prairie was profound. It was not the empty, terrifying silence that Hannah had felt after James died. It was a pregnant silence, full of sleeping life, full of promise. They reached the summit and dismounted near the old, gnarled cottonwood tree. The remains of their campfire from that stormy night months ago were gone, washed away by wind and rain. They stood on the edge of the cliff, looking down at the valley. Below them, the lights of Silver Mesa Ranch twinkled warm and yellow, and further south, near the creek, the faint glow of the fires from the visiting Comanche families could be seen. The two lights did not compete. They blended. "It is beautiful," Hannah whispered. "It is ours," Nokoni said. He turned to her. In the starlight, his face was stark and beautiful. The harshness of the warrior was still there, but the bitterness was gone. "The railroad is coming," Nokoni said quietly. "I heard talk in town. 2 years, maybe 3. They will bring more people, more fences, more laws." "Let them come," Hannah said. She stepped closer to him. "We have held this ground against an army. We can hold it against a train. We will not be alone," Nokoni said. "We have Little Hawk. We have the tribe. We have the town." "We have each other," Hannah said. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. His skin was cool from the night air. "Do you remember what you said?" Hannah asked. "That first night." "I said many things," Nokoni murmured, his hands finding her waist, pulling her flush against him. "You said you hated those who try to chain the earth," Hannah said. "I still do," Nokoni whispered, lowering his head until his breath mingled with hers. "But I have learned that the heart needs an anchor. You are my anchor, Hannah." "And you are my sail," she replied. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of their first kiss on this ridge. It was slow. It was deep. It was the kiss of a husband and a wife who knew the worst of each other and loved it anyway. It was a kiss that tasted of commitment, of battles won, and of a future that was wide open. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, burning bright and fast. The prairie was silent, but in the heart of the night, a new fire was burning. It was not a fire of destruction. It was the hearth fire of a home that had bridged 2 worlds. Nokoni broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. He looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the American West. "Let us go home," he said. "We are home," Hannah answered, and under the watchful gaze of the stars, the sheriff's widow and the Comanche warrior turned their horses back toward the lights of the valley, riding side by side into the history they were writing together. Thank you so much for riding along with me on this journey through the dust and determination of Red Rock Crossing. It has been a pleasure to spin this yarn for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where in the world you are listening to this story from. It is always amazing to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed the saga of Hannah and Nokoni, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales for more stories of the frontier. Don't forget to like the video and smash that hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.